Today we are going to hear a story from Dana. You have a very personal story related to domestic violence. I thank you for wanting to come forward and sharing your experience. I know that, like many others who have experienced domestic violence, you feel very strongly about creating awareness, not only by what happened to you, but also to help prevent others from falling into a similar situation. So Dana, tell us your story.
Sure. I was thinking maybe I should read my victim impact statement to you that I read at his sentencing hearing, because part of what happened for me in my process once my husband was arrested after my attack, he pled guilty in exchange for no time for his crimes. And so I had an opportunity to go to a sentencing hearing, which all victims do. And it is an extraordinarily scary time because you have to literally go face your abuser and tell your story naked and afraid in the courtroom in front of anyone else that's having their cases heard in that same time frame during that day, that are sitting in the courtroom and can hear the awful details of the life that you have been trying to cover up for so many years. And I think that it's such a poignant moment for victims to transition potentially from being a victim to a survivor in that moment, when they have an opportunity to have their voice heard, not only perhaps for the first time ever, but in a court of law where we're all sworn under oath to tell the truth, nothing but the truth. And we have the ultimate judge in a black robe there, if you will, to determine whether we truly are telling the truth. And I think that if the victim has an opportunity to tell their truth in that moment and they are authentic in that moment, then the same thing could happen for them that happened for me, which is that the judge looked me right in the eye and said, I believe every word that you just said. And instead of my husband being able to exchange pleading guilty for no time, he ended up getting sentenced for 45 days, which was better than nothing, but I believe he should have gotten a lot more. But that in that moment, like I said, I do really believe that's where the transition could potentially happen for many of us from victim to survivor, because you have your voice heard for the first time and it's validated because of where you're telling it, and your abuser cannot silence you. They have to sit there and listen to you. And that is an empowering moment, because for the first time for many of us, we have an opportunity to let our abuser know exactly how we feel. So this is exactly what I read on his sentencing hearing, which ironically was the last time that I probably will ever see him. And it was on Valentine's Day. So this was my chance to give him my Hallmark card, if you will, of how I felt about our relationship, and send him on his way. So here we go. My name is Dana Pounds, and I am the brave survivor of domestic violence. I am here today so that the full impact of my crime is brought to light. Since the day that I have met Jim Pounds, he has been manipulating and controlling me. He is a textbook abuser, and I am here to tell the whole story of the past 15 years of emotional, physical, financial, and psychological abuse that I have endured. First, let me share a little bit of our personal relationship history. In 1999, I was diagnosed with a rare type of sarcoma and have been surviving cancer for over 20 years. Despite amputating my leg in 2008, my cancer came back in my hip and pelvis, and I have been doing weekly IV chemo for over a year at Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. I cannot wear a prosthesis due to the cancer in my hip and pelvis, so I use my crutches and a wheelchair for my mobility. Jim and I met in 2004. I was in a very vulnerable position. I had just gotten divorced from my ex-husband, who had abandoned me during my cancer treatments and had an affair, getting ready to start the strongest chemotherapy I had done to date, and I was terrified. I was the perfect prey for his manipulation, control, and abuse. In 2007, I started Nature's Academy. This is a Florida-based nonprofit that provides STEM education to underserved students. Jim was employed by Nature's Academy until his arrest on December the 23rd for a violent crime. In 2017, we moved to Port Angeles, Washington, to build a custom home for my disabilities and to participate in a chemotherapy clinical trial for my cancer. We've had a very difficult build. It's been lasting for over 2 years, and we've been living in a 17-foot travel trailer with 2 cats and a dog since February of 2017. It's been very challenging and rugged living for an amputee with cancer. Now for some history about the abuse. First and foremost, he neglected to tell me the extent of his criminal past. I never knew that he spent over a year in prison for multiple felonies. In November of 2004, he was arrested for battery. In September of 2008, he abandoned me after my mother's funeral. In September of 2010, he choked me in a hotel bathroom while we were on our honeymoon. In June of 2016, he chased down a stranger and verbally assaulted him during a road rage incident. In June of 2017, he verbally and physically had a verbal and physical altercation with a stranger at the finish line of a 5K. In April of 2019, he had a verbal altercation with a former framer and threatened to kill him and his girlfriend. In October of 2019, he had a verbal altercation with our former electrician in the parking lot. Throughout 2019, repeated verbal and emotional abuse before, during, and after my chemotherapy treatments. Multiple times he's left me at the hospital with no way to reach him, wondering how I was going to get back home after my treatments. I want you to know that this list is by no means comprehensive of the nearly 2 decades of abuse that I have endured, but I'm hopeful to illuminate the type of person that my abuser is. On December the 23rd, 2019, Jim Pounds changed my life forever. The morning began with a huge argument where he falsely accused me of having an affair and called me horrific names. I could see that things were escalating quickly, and I was fearful for my safety. After removing his wedding ring and telling me that he was done, ready to divorce me, he went into town and began drinking the bar at midday. Upon his return several hours later, he continued to drink both beer and vodka, and my fear for my safety increased. He told me he had hired a private investigator to research my fictitious affairs and demanded that I write him a check for $25,000 to keep him from exposing my adulterous ways. I messaged my neighbor Robin to tell her I was getting more and more afraid and unsure of what I should do. She wanted me to leave, but I would not leave my cats and dog, fearing for their safety. Every hour, his rage increased, and he continued to escalate and abuse me both emotionally and verbally. Around 8 o'clock, I was hiding in our travel trailer with the dog and the cats when he threw the door open, grabbed a serrated knife off the counter, and began to threaten to kill me if I did not write him a check for $25,000. I began screaming and begged him to put the knife down, and he lunged after me. I was able to get my established safe message off to Robin, my neighbor, before he ripped the phone from my hands, preventing me from calling 911 and getting any further help. He took my crutches and preventing me from being able to escape. With a knife in one hand, he lunged at me repeatedly, grabbing my hair on the back of my head and smashing my face up against the wall several times. All the while screaming at me, "Write me that check for $25,000 or I will kill you, you F-U-C-K-I-N-G-C-U-N-T. I was terrified and thought that he was going to kill me, and somehow was able to recover the tablet briefly, which I used to record a 9-second video of him attacking me. The attack went on like this for several minutes, me kicking and screaming, him lunging and grabbing at my legs and arms and dragging me toward him. Finally, Robin arrived and she pulled him off of me. He wandered off for a short while and then returned to the property to taunt me further. The police were called and he was arrested. I literally thought my life was going to end during that attack. Additionally, our two cats and our dog were completely traumatized as we were all trapped in the confined travel for the entire incident. He blocked the door, he took my crutches, and he beat me violently for over 3 minutes. The next day, he immediately violated his no contact order by calling me upon his release from jail. He continued to try to manipulate me by calling and even visiting my close friends to somehow try to reach me. He was arrested again on December the 31st, 2019 due to these violations. I did not think that he could stoop any lower than attacking his disabled wife with a knife that has been doing chemotherapy for over a year due to her cancer. But he did once released the second time from jail. On January the 3rd, 2020, he went into the Wells Fargo branch and illegally and fraudulently transferred $109,000 from Nature's Academy, the nonprofit he was formerly employed at, into his personal banking account. He left exactly $1 in the business account as a final retaliation statement to me. These funds are not his personally. They are all grant and donor funds provided to Nature's Academy to conduct STEM education programs that he was never authorized to steal this money from the children that Nature's Academy serves. The timing of this theft was all quite calculated by him. He waited until Friday afternoon to conduct the transfers, ensuring I would not have the appropriate resources available to me until Monday morning. This gave him the entire weekend to flee to the East Coast to his hometown of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is 3 hours ahead of us. This permitted him to stay a few steps ahead of me, and he was able to withdraw $100,000 on Monday morning in the form of a cashier's check. Thankfully, I have worked diligently with Wells Fargo to recover this $100,000 cashier's check, but he was still able to get the other $9,000 out in cash before I could stop him, and I continue to seek those funds for Nature's Academy's retribution. This ordeal has taken a great toll on me physically. Following the attack, I was covered in over 24 bruises and scratches, some of which took almost a month to heal. He abandoned me and our animals, leaving me to finish building our home while living in a travel trailer in a garage. I have never lived on my own before as an amputee, and since I cannot wear a prosthesis, I am very limited in my physical activities. I cannot walk my dog, take out the trash, or even go to the grocery store on my own because I have no way for myself to carry the groceries. You cannot imagine the extent of hardship his abandonment has created for me. Due to the chaotic nature of this incident, I have had to postpone my chemotherapy for my cancer for 2 months. During this time frame, my cancer has exploded again, likely due to the lack of chemotherapy, coupled with this incredible emotional duress. I am in significant physical pain, and my team has tripled my dose of chemotherapy when I resume my regimen. This also poses another physical challenge of how to get to and from my weekly chemotherapy treatments while caring for 3 animals in a home. Finally, just 2 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with my 4th type of metastatic cancer and had extensive neck surgery on January the 29th to remove it. The recovery from this entire incident has been grueling due to my additional medical challenges. This attack has left me financially devastated. Due to my cancer and disability, I have a very limited income. He was the primary breadwinner in our marriage, working for Nature's Academy since 2007. As such, he is the only one qualified for our construction loan from the bank, and he abandoned me with over $60,000 in outstanding bills from contractors. Because my name is not on the loan, I have no access to the construction funds, which translates into a significant negative impact for the contractors and their subs. Because of his theft of money from Nature's Academy, a protective order has been put in place for all of our shared assets. This means that neither he nor I can have access to any of our shared assets, which essentially means I have absolutely nothing financially to survive on. He has left me destitute to care for 3 animals and myself with absolutely nothing financially to survive on. Due to his theft of $109,000 from Nature's Academy, the board of directors has determined to cease operations effective as of March 6, 2020. Nature's Academy has had to cancel all of its spring programs, devastating thousands of children who were expected to participate in a field trip. 13 years of building my legacy completely demolished by his reckless behavior. Emotionally, I am forever changed by enduring 15 years of verbal, mental, and physical abuse. My self-esteem has been significantly damaged, and I have a very difficult time trusting anyone or anything. I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD and am attending multiple counseling sessions per week to aid with my recovery. I have extreme anxiety that has caused my blood pressure to rise significantly. I am not eating well. I don't sleep at night. Every little noise that I hear, I'm wondering if that's him coming back to finish what he started. I'm terrified for my life, and when I see him, I begin shaking uncontrollably. I am unsure of how to recover from this type of emotional trauma, but I am hopeful that having my voice heard in court today is a significant step in this process. That's my victim impact statement.
Very, very brave.
Thank you.
There's so much packed in that statement. Let me start by asking you, how are you doing right now?
I'm 6 months out, and I am the definition of the recovery from trauma is not linear. So I have some pretty good days, and even I wouldn't even be able to, I think, define them holistically as a whole day is good. You know, I have really good moments and I have really bad moments. So I am doing, I think, I'm doing better than one would expect given that I have been through. 21 years of surviving cancer and being an amputee, even at times presents more of a challenge to me. It also provides me with a skill set of survival and trauma recovery that I've already been through. So I think that that really helps to aid in this particular setting.
Well, the chances of recovering from osteosarcoma, right?
It's a type of sarcoma. Yes, not osteosarcoma, but it is a type of sarcoma. Yes.
Okay, the chances of survival of that are very slim. So you are a double hero.
Thank you. And this is my, now I've had 4 kinds of cancer. So yes.
Real survivor in every sense of
Yes.
the word. That's
Yes.
amazing. And very brave because on top of that, you're coming forward wanting to share your story publicly. Let's just go back a little bit, if you don't mind. Someone hearing your story who may not be familiar or have experienced what domestic violence is like, from the outside, it's very easy to say, well, why didn't she leave? She just said, he tried to choke her during their honeymoon. So I'm just going to go back even more. When you first met him, what was the relationship like then?
So that is a great question because it's definitely been one that I've had to ask myself as I've gone through this process. Because I also like to see myself as a courageous, strong, intelligent person. So of course I'm thinking to myself, why did I not wake up and smell the coffee earlier on in this process? And from the very beginning, because he was clearly, this is something that he has been practicing for quite some time. I learned after all of this had happened that he had been arrested over 30 times before he met me, but of course never disclosed any of that information to me. So he was the master at spinning the story of whatever way would put him in the best light and make me think that I needed him the most. So the day that I met him, I literally was out celebrating my divorce from my former husband, and I was getting ready to do this very strong chemotherapy, and I was terrified to be on my own, and I felt very abandoned by my former husband because he basically just picked up and left me for another woman in the middle of a chemo treatment, and of course I have some accountability in that process, but nonetheless that was the end result. And so I felt very vulnerable, and when I met him he said all the right things. And now that I have done some reading about the patterns of what these abusers are like, how they lay the groundwork for their prey, it is textbook what he did as far as saying all the right things, painting the fantasy picture. When there were slip ups of things that happened, immediately being able to come back in and being so apologetic and making these promises for this life that I was dreaming of having with him. And you would get these little nuggets here and there of the positivity and the promises of the fantasy that you think could possibly come true. And that's what keeps you hanging on, and you keep believing that it's possible that that could happen. And when you first meet, the fantasy is somewhat real for the whole portion of the beginning of your relationship, because they've got to lure you in and make you think that that fantasy truly is real. But the more involved that you become, and once the gaslighting starts and the whole manipulation of your reality of making you think that what they're telling you, of that you're no longer, your thoughts that you're having of what's right and wrong is no longer correct, and they're telling you what's right and wrong. And because it's such a repetitive trauma, you eventually begin to believe what they're telling you, and through their isolation tactics you don't have access to others to help assist you, to hear other people's reality, to say to you, no, actually that doesn't sound right what he's saying to you. And you just continuously are emotionally and psychologically manipulated in the background to the point where your reality is so skewed that it seems normal to stay. And the situation that you're in has become normalized. And it's all of a sudden everyone else is not normal and you're normal. And it is a true psychological terror to go on, because your reality becomes completely not reality.
You explain that so well. A lot of people who've gone through domestic violence still have trouble explaining. how they didn't see, like how they were gaslighting and how this is a new reality. Like you just explained it so well. What would you say to someone who may be in that fantasy space right now? Let's just say early in a relationship where everything just seems so amazing. What would you say were the red flags? Because I'm sure there were. Now that you know what those red flags are and looking back, what would you say were the specific red flags that, had you not been vulnerable, had you been very aware exactly what to look for, that now looking back you would say, oh, that was a red flag. It was so big. That was the time I should have just put a halt to things.
I think that the cliche, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And that's exactly what it felt like when I first met him. It was sort of this whirlwind romance, and there was these fantastical promises. And I remember 2 weeks into dating him, he was saying things like, "Oh, you know, someday I'm going to marry you." And I have even read, now that I've gone back and done my reading, that that's a classic statement that these abusers will make early on in your relationship, is to make promises for longevity with you, or marrying you, or for taking care of your children, or they make promises to you that feel like they are just too good to be true. And I think that that is a really ubiquitous, without having to use a specific example, but a way to apply it to yourself, almost in anything in life. If it feels too good to be true, you should be a little bit skeptical about it, and in particular in this situation. And I just also wanted to mention something that I was thinking about in reflection of the last question that you had asked, about how typical the questions are when people always wonder, why didn't they leave earlier, or why did she stay so long, with all of those things that went on. And I think the best way that I have been able to really change my mindset in that capacity is because I immediately turn it and I ask, why did he do that to me for so long? And why did he choose to abuse me like that? Instead of me asking myself why, because I didn't make the choice to have him abuse me, and I didn't make the choice to stay there as long as I did. I survived for as long as I possibly could. And it is a miracle that I made it out when I did. And I'm so proud of myself that I did after 16 years. And I'm not ashamed of the fact that I was there for 16 years. I'm so proud that I survived for 16 years.
Is there any point during those years where you were hoping that things would change for the better?
Every day, every day,
Is that,
always,
would you say that was part of what kept you also?
always. And I have spoken with some other domestic violence survivors, and we all have that in common, where we are hoping that tomorrow is going to bring the day that we're going to actually make him happy, and he'll be happy with us, and the rainbows and the unicorns will appear through the window, and everything is going to be okay. And we just keep holding on for that. And we, like I said, we get little treasures of hope here and there. They know exactly when we're about to break and when to throw us a little nugget of hope, and we hold on to it for dear life because we're survivors and we know. And eventually, for me, just I couldn't take it anymore.
Just going back to what I'd asked you earlier, if you could look back and see, specific signs that are red flags, and you said if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. I say that there is the red flag that was very specific, and you mentioned it, and that was he talked about marriage within the first few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a red flag right there, is that the devotion for life and that rush into too early. The too early is the red flag. The reason I'm doing this series is because I want to give a voice to people who've gone through domestic violence, so that people actually start realizing all the different aspects. That's why I have more than one person share their story, because even though there are commonalities, there are still differences from case to case. So the more of this we put out there, the more we can create the awareness. So if someone listening may not have experienced any of this, but maybe in the future they will encounter someone and they'll get into a relationship where they go, wait a minute, I remember a story that looked exactly like this. So that's the reason I want all of us to share our stories. So I applaud you for coming forward once again to share yours. You said something earlier about the judicial system. Can you expand on that? You were happy that he got time, but he didn't get enough time. you should have gotten more. And actually, after reading your statement, I totally agree. Did he get any time or for anything else he has done that was not legal?
No, so here is some surprising information about the process of what happened to him. So when he was arrested the first time, it obviously was for a violent crime. He attacked me with a knife and tried to kill me and held me, as his captive for multiple minutes. So I would refer to that as false imprisonment or kidnapping, is what I would think that would be referred to as. And after the next day, when it came time for him to be released, when he had his first appearance, he didn't even have any bond. They just released him on his own recognizance. Given all of his felonies and all of his history that he has, they still released him ROR. And it took 5 violations of the no contact order before they would pick him back up again. And they didn't even actually rearrest him. They actually went to his motel room and knocked on the door in the morning and gave him until noon that day to go turn himself in, which was more than enough time for him to go around town and drain every bank account possible, because now he knew what was coming. And they warned him and gave him a heads up instead of just arresting him again. So it permitted him the ability to start making some plans of how to vindicate what had happened to him. And so it was almost as if they were on his side. The first time that I called to let them know that he had violated his no contact order, they told me that, oh, it's just every single time that they get that call from their victims, the first time, they just have to give a pass to the abuser, because they'll just say, oh, I misdialed, or my pocket dialed her, or something like that. And this is what they're telling me on the phone. And I'm saying to them, he took my crutches, he took my phone, he tried to kill me with a knife, and he's already violating the no contact order within 24 hours, and you don't really care. And again, it took 5 times for him to violate that before they finally picked him up again. So a protective order or a no contact order or a restraining order, at least in the United States, it's just a piece of paper that you can hang on your fridge. That's all that it is. It doesn't do anything. They have to actually violate it for them to get arrested. And if they're going to violate it, you have had to have already had a precedent set of violence in order for them to be able to even to provide you with a court order of protection. So the precedent has already been set that they're extraordinarily violent. And then the only way to get them rearrested again is after they come and violate you again, which you most likely will not live through when they violate the no contact or the no protection or the protection orders. So that's a huge failure in the system in and of itself, that there's really no real protection for the victims. Once their abusers are released from incarceration, there is no real protection and no real feeling of security, because if they violate the no contact order, it's just kind of like a pass for a few times before they'll do anything about it. Then once he was arrested and people hear the story about where I am physically challenged and the horror of what he did to me, we have 4 levels of assault in the US, 1 to 4, 4 being the lightest, 1 being the strongest. And I charged him with assault 4, the lightest that there was. And they told me that in the United States, in order for him to be charged with a felony, I needed to have missing teeth, broken bones, stitches, or a concussion. And because I didn't have any of those 4 qualifying parameters, I didn't get to have mine be a felony. It just stayed as a gross misdemeanor. So his behavior was recognized on the scale of punitive damages as the lowest possible. Now, talk about money in the United States. In the state of Washington, where I live, if you steal more than $10,000 from the company that you work for and you're caught at it, it is a mandatory federal imprisonment of a minimum of 10 years. So you steal $10,000 and you get a minimum of 10 years. You threaten to kill someone and hold them against their will and beat them violently with a knife, and you get the lightest assault charge, which when you plead guilty to it, in exchange for no time whatsoever. So to me, looks like our legislative system and our punitive system is favoring money in a far higher place than we do human life. And that is extraordinarily egregious to me.
Didn't he steal money from the foundation?
He did. And that's why I know what those punitive damages are. And unfortunately, because of the fact that we're married in the background, it muddies the waters of what happens here. And when I reported the crime, the police erroneously, because the foundation is a nonprofit foundation, so it has nothing to do with us personally. When we get divorced, it certainly won't be a part of the asset separation during our divorce. But unfortunately, because this is a small town and the police couldn't understand what I was telling them when I filed the police report about the theft of the money, they immediately assigned it as a civil case, not as a criminal case. So I have been fighting for 6 months to try to get it changed over to a criminal case, but unfortunately, I have had no luck in doing that. And so he wins again because he's still got the money and he's got no crime for it.
One has to hope that karma really does exist.
Thankfully, I was able to recover a good portion of it, but he still has some of the money. And it's now to the point, which is why me recovering the money, being a tenacious, responsible founder and executive director of this organization, I'm supposed to be the steward of the finances, and all of a sudden this criminal steals all of this money. So of course I'm going to do everything within my power. I will not sleep until I'm able to exhaust all avenues to recover whatever assets I possibly can. So I was able to recover $100,000 of the $109,000, thank goodness. I spoke with my divorce attorney, and this is where being in small town America worked in my favor, because she's very well known in all of the by all of the judges. And I was able to have her actually write up a protective order for the money and bring that over to the courts and have them issue an immediate protective order for the money. But it was capped at $100,000, because if we went above $100,000, it would have moved it up to a federal court. And we needed to keep it in a county court system in order for it to move through as quickly as it did. So he stole the money on a Friday, and by Tuesday evening, I had the money, that $100,000, coming back over to the Nature's Academy account, and he still has that $9,000. What's happened now is that has worked against me, because from an embezzlement charge standpoint, the damages are not significant enough because I already recovered the money on my own. So the only damages that remain are the $9,000 that he still holds on to. And in the US, that doesn't qualify for anything else but small claims court. So now I have to take it upon myself and Nature's Academy to do all of the legwork and take him to small claims court to try to get that $9,000 back.
From a law's perspective, what would you like to see change in your state? And do you know of anything that is happening right now that is in the works in order to help change the system so that other victims don't end up on the losing end, either financially and obviously in fear? Because when your abuser gets to walk away or get minimal time, there is that fear. You're constantly looking behind your back. You know, are you safe? Is it safe to go to bed? You know, do you have to have an alarm system in the home? That's what I had to do. I had to put an alarm system in my home when I kicked out my abuser, and spent sleepless nights just staring at the alarm light, making sure nobody was actually breaking in.
And the cameras.
Right. So, is there anything happening there where you are that is in motion towards a better system?
From my understanding so far, there is little to nothing being done to change the system here. It is not, unfortunately, akin with the way that the laws are set up currently. That priority of where this particular subset of criminal activity lives does not seem to be a high priority. And I would say that that seems to be ubiquitous throughout the US, through all the domestic violence survivors that I have been speaking with. So the legislation, that I would like to see change that's directly related to me straight out of the gate, is that it's an atrocity to me to think that what happened, where he prevented me from being able to call 911 and took my crutches, and that he still was only charged with the lightest assault charge possible. And so I have already spoken with the prosecuting attorney's office, and I've begun to get the names of my local politicians that I'm going to start working with to change the law so that we can incorporate another parameter into those four that I listed to you: broken bones, stitches, concussion, missing teeth. Disability needs to be on the list. If you have a disability that prevents you from being able to escape your abuser, whether it's a physical disability. I have a friend of mine who is deaf. If she's not wearing her cochlear implants, she can't hear a thing. That is a huge disability for her if she were in an abusive relationship and something were to happen. So that needs to be changed immediately so that the punishment can truly fit the crime in that scenario. The second thing that I plan on doing as far as the legislation goes is that we need to really address the fact that there's little to no protection for the children. I don't have children, and I'm so grateful that I do not, and I applaud, and the level of heroism that I think that the domestic violence survivors that have come out of this that come with children are on another level that I think even it's just, to take care of themselves and the children and the abuse that they've all been through. And I see it time and time again that parental rights trump the children's protective rights over and over again, that the abuser is given the right repetitively to have access to the children because he's the parent or she's the parent, and she needs to have access to the children, which is an indirect pathway for them to have access to their victims. And if they abused the parent of the children, they are certainly abusing the children because it wasn't the person that they were abusing that made the abuse happen. The abuser is the abuser, and they will be abusing everyone within contact, children included. And so if we want to break the cycle, we need to address the children and get them better protection. And the third part of what I'd like to do, which it doesn't have to necessarily do with changing the laws, but it's about what I'm doing here today, which is sharing my story and speaking about domestic violence, because it is a subject that is so well hidden and so kept in the shadows. And until we start having conversations about it, there's nothing that will happen to change it. And it is an uncomfortable topic, and it is not a friendly stranger topic that you would sit down at a Starbucks and just have a conversation about, but we need to get it into a more comfortable place so that we can bring some light into a really dark place, because it's time. There's a lot of us out here that need help.
Domestic violence cases have increased, so it actually has been getting a spotlight. But even with that, a lot of people don't like to talk about it, or they think it doesn't impact them, right? They think, oh, it's not my story, it's somebody else's story. And funny enough, sometimes you can be in an abusive relationship and not realize that it is an abusive relationship. You are here in so many levels. You're a cancer survivor, you're an amputee, you had an abuser who, well, you described him. I won't add to that, into trying to change the laws. We need more people to come forward. We need more of us to do something to create change, whether it is just sharing the story to create the awareness, or contacting the local political people that can help change some of these laws and actually put more value into human lives than money. I applaud you. I see you a hero on so many levels because of all the things you're doing, and I applaud you on top of that also for fighting and finding a way to get the money back. And so now you're in your home that you built.
Yes, thank goodness. Yes,
So
and I'm, as karma would have it for me, thankfully all of this happened just a week or two before the house was finished. So he never spent a night in this house. It's just been me and my animals the whole time. So it's been literally a fresh start, and it's totally wheelchair accessible. And it's the first time I've ever lived in a house that's flat everywhere. I struggled for a while with not having access to the outdoors. And so I built this house the way that I could sit in my wheelchair and basically feel like I'm out in the mountains without necessarily having to do all the work to get there. So it's been the perfect sanctuary to heal in. And I am so grateful that I have it.
is there anything else you would like to share before we go?
Just that I am hopeful that my voice is going to help others out there. And I am really honored to be a part of your program. And thank you so much for all of your patience and for creating the space to have our voices heard, because this is exactly what we need.